for Cybercrime Radio. I'm Charlie Osborne. Joining me today is Amir Shahmiri, Senior Sales Engineer at Mend.io. This episode is brought to you by Mend.io, whose mission it is to make application security frictionless for developers and scalable for security teams without compromise. To learn more about our sponsor, visit Mend.io. Amir, thank you for joining us today and welcome.
Thank you so much, Charlie, for having me.
So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the challenges associated with cloud-native app development. A lot of traditional security practices were designed for fairly stable and static infrastructure. So now, how does the move to cloud-native architectures change security practices, especially when you have to consider elements like containers and app-related services?
When we look at the traditional infrastructure, as you mentioned, it's relatively stable, right? Servers and environments change slowly. Security tools were then designed around that model. So they became slow and they became sort of manual in that approach as well. Now, when we look at the cloud-native environments, it's very different. We've got containers that spin up, we've got services that scale automatically, we've got infrastructure that changes frequently. And the reality is, deployments may happen multiple times a day. Now, if we're using that old approach of static sort of security checks, we're not going to be able to keep up with all of these deployments. So what we need to do is have security integrated into the pipelines, have automation workflows, and have continuous monitoring as a part of that. Security must operate at the same speed as development for it to make sense and work with one another.
And Amir, when people think about application security today, they often focus on vulnerabilities in code. But in cloud-native environments, why do you think that configuration issues could be just as critical?
So obviously the vulnerabilities in the code are still important, right? But cloud-native environments introduce new risks. The landscape has widened. We might have misconfigured IAM permissions or publicly exposed services. These issues can be as dangerous as code vulnerabilities, so we can't ignore them. So modern AppSec must include infrastructure as code analysis, configuration scanning, runtime monitoring. Make sure that we are covering the entire application environment and not just the code.
And could you give us some examples of misconfigurations or infrastructure risks that organizations tend to overlook, but that attackers like to exploit?
Absolutely. So when we look at infrastructure as code violations, it could be very simple as permission issues, right? All of a sudden, we've used the wrong permissions or we've left secrets within our actual infrastructure as code files, and we're opening doors to our actual infrastructure. So it could be as simple as having our wrong configurations on the actual permissions. And that itself can be very, very detrimental to the organization, because if you're not monitoring all aspects, you're making sure that you're actually having cracks within your application security program. So it can be very, very simple, but very, very impactful in the way that it sort of impacts the actual organization.
And you mentioned development and the development lifecycle earlier, so that's something I'd like to touch upon. So what does it mean to integrate security directly into the development lifecycle rather than, say, just bolting it on at the end as an afterthought?
Wonderful question, Charlie. So obviously by integrating it as a part of the software development lifecycle, you're catching up on the actual vulnerabilities and issues that you have earlier on. This not only means that you're doing it during the actual development lifecycle, which means that you can actually fix these problems whilst you're actually coding, which obviously helps, right? Because that saves both time and money. You're not having to roll back applications from production. You're not having to have any sort of mitigations after the fact of release. And it just means that you've got a continuous approach. We write code, we push it, we check it, we make sure it's all okay, and then we can start to release that code. It becomes a much more autonomous process, and it means that it's not a manual approach of just scanning right before we're actually releasing code and finding out all of the problems just before we want to deploy. We're now catching up on these problems as and when we're writing the code, and having the approach be a part of our software development lifecycle rather than being at the end of it.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
Mend.io is the leading application security solution, helping organizations reduce application risk efficiently. Built for modern, AI-driven, and traditional development environments alike, Mend.io prioritizes what matters most so teams fix less, reduce risk faster, and deliver software with confidence. To learn more, visit www.mend.io.
And now, back to the podcast.
Something else I wanted to ask you, if you start to embed security into the development lifecycle, preferably at the earliest stages, in your experience, does that change the relationship between developers and security teams today?
Absolutely. The security checks give the actual developer the feedback they need, right? They see the issues much earlier, which in turn means that they're going to be fixing these issues earlier. So security becomes a part of the workflow rather than becoming a bottleneck. So rather than making developers' lives much harder, we're trying to enable them to make the best decisions possible and integrate security earlier into the development lifecycle for them.
And something you mentioned earlier, which was the problem in modern development when it comes to balancing security with speed. So can you explain to me why traditional security gates, as it were, tend to slow innovation? And also, what can we do about it?
Great question. So obviously, traditionally, it appears at the end of the pipeline, right? It causes delays, it causes frictions, you have to have workarounds. It becomes a problem that no one wants to really deal with. But with the way application development is taking place now, with vibe coding, obviously AI-generated code being so readily available to everyone, code is being shipped out faster than ever, right? It's inevitable. So by integrating into the tooling that you're using, so for example, if we're using Cursor, having an MCP server that we connect to scan the actual responses that we're getting from AI, for example, we've got the ability to shift left really, really early, catching the vulnerabilities and making sure that the development process isn't interrupted. Rather, it's creating secure code by design. And that obviously makes sure that developers are happy with everything the way it's taking place, but also making sure that they're fixing the problems that they see within their code before it becomes a problem in production.
Amir, thank you for joining us today. Do you have anything else you would like to add?
Just obviously, the sort of landscape is changing, right? So we need to make sure that we're keeping on top of this landscape as well. So obviously making sure that we're adapting our current practices to take into consideration the way that we're working today.
For Cybercrime Radio, I'm Charlie Osborne. Joining me today was Amir Shahmiri, Senior Sales Engineer at Mend.io. This episode was brought to you by Mend.io, whose mission it is to make application security frictionless for developers and scalable for security teams without compromise. To learn more about our sponsor, visit Mend.io.